never gets old. You never know what you're going to find at the Boat Sport and Travel Show. We are having a fantastic opportunity to spend time in the Travel Cafe. We're at the 65th Annual Ford Boat Sport and Travel Show. And truly, when you come to this show, you never know what might be interesting, what might be different, somebody new, and that's exactly what Indy Sports Show Live is supposed to be all about. I'm Brian Pointer, your host. Speaking of new and different, I know nothing about motors, especially boat motors, but you do. Jay Walls is here with us, and you know, you're the Antique Outboard Motor Club. You're set up over here right outside of the Travel Cafe. Quite an impressive display. What in the world? Is there that much interest in this?
Oh yeah, every year we see great interest in the history of where outboard motors came from. Nowadays, what most folks see is the brand new stuff out in the cattle barn. And what they find interesting is the history of the outboard motor. Where did the first one come from? What it looked like?
Where did it come from?
Well, a college student was rebuilding a motorcycle in 1903 in his dorm room. And
nothing could go wrong there.
And he took the motor off the motorcycle and C-clamped it to the back of his desk chair and was rebuilding it. And as he looked at the motor clamped to the chair, he thought, well, I could put a set of bevel gears on the motor and put a down shaft down to a lower unit and have this clamp on a boat. And that started it. And that was, like I said, 1903. By 1905, he had a motor prototype.
And here you are in 2019. You've got a club, the Antique Outboard Motor Club.
Yep.
Is this something that's just unique to Indiana, or is it a worldwide organization?
The Antique Outboard Motor Club is a worldwide organization. A Purdue graduate, actually, who lived in Texas in 1965, felt there was an opportunity and a need to start a club, Antique Outboard Motor Club, and that's where it came from, and it's now 54 years old and continues to grow.
So you have your chapter that's representing the club as an interesting chapter history. What's the MOB?
Yeah, the MOB's Michiana Outboard Boating, and we started in 1984. As the club grew, we had a need to have local groups, you know, so they get together and have meets, and during a meet you'll have like a pitch-in lunch, and guys with similar interest in running these antique boat motors show up. They'll set up their boat and that, and then we have little on-water contests and displays, and sometimes if it's a formal meet, they'll give ribbons or trophies for best restored and that kind of thing that you would see at any car show, engine show, and that local, you know, trophies.
Jay, how in the world did you get involved in all this?
Well, my dad owned a lawnmower shop in Speedway, and in 1965 he bought a 12-foot John boat, and he was looking for a motor to run on that, go fishing. And so I was 5 years old, and in that time a gentleman pulled into the lawnmower shop with an old farm truck, and he was wanting to haul the junk outboards away, or the junk lawnmowers away, excuse me. And so they made a deal, and part of the deal was that the truck contained 2 old boat motors. And the guy jumped up in the truck, kicked those off, and hauled the junk away. My dad didn't know what one of the motors was. It didn't have a name on it. And he had heard that there was this club, Antique Outboard Motor Club. So he wrote and sent a Polaroid, remember that? Polaroid? Yeah. Polaroid picture of the motor to the club, and they wrote back and said it was a Sears Water Witch. And they sent back a membership application. Well, he wasn't interested in the club. He just wanted to know what that motor was. and he was telling his boss at a second job about all that. And the boss said, well, when I bought my house, there was a motor in the attic. I'll bring it in and give it to you. So he brought that and gave it to my dad, and he didn't know what it was either. He wanted to write the club and ask him, but he felt bad about not joining, so he joined the club. And this thing snowballed for my whole lifetime, 50 years now.
What's the oldest that you've restored?
Well, the display's got a motor in it that's a 1908. And
now, wait a minute. You just said that outboards really started about what, 1906?
1906.
Wow.
The first production run was 1906, and it was the name of the motor was a Waterman, and the 1908 Waterman is basically the same design as the 06, and so when you look at the display, you're really seeing the very beginning.
So how many of these motors do you own in your personal collection?
Well, my collection over all these years has grown to about 300. And I know you'd think, gee whiz, that's a lot of motors, but there's guys in the club that have motors over 1,000, and the interesting stories that goes with that, because when you start buying lots of motors, you end up with storage problems. and
there's a barn in this story, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. And actually, the house, one of the guys, the house came for sale next door to him. He bought the house and filled it full of motors. So there's, with any club, you'll hear interesting stories when people start collecting.
It's truly
and
one
the
of the interesting things when you get like-minded individuals, and that's what we say about the Boat Sport and Travel Show. There's something here for everybody. It's a group of like-minded people, whether you're hunting, fishing, outdoor, antique boat motors.
Yeah, well, it's a great fit for us and the Boat Sport and Travel Show. Like I said, when people come, they're shopping for a new boat, and that sometimes the questions come up of why is it this way, why is it that way, especially the size nowadays of some of these huge motors that they have. And so that's where the great thing with the Antique Outboard Motor Club is you can come and see where it started from the very beginning and how motors progressed up into the 1980s.
You're probably not seeing many 1908 300 horsepower engines, are you?
No, 1908.
Could they even push a canoe?
Well, back in that time, there was no such thing as a boat that was motor propelled. That was the beginning, right? So all of the boats had what we called a wine glass transom or a canoe, and they were made to displace water. So as you would row through the water, the boat plows through the water and displaces the water. After about 1926, boat handling, the motors were getting up in horsepower, and the boats were trying to plane off, which everybody knows nowadays, boat gets up on the water, planes off. But back in those days, the boat designs, being narrow transoms, they wouldn't plane off, and they'd get very dangerous and ill handling. So that's where boat design changed. In 1926, the boat manufacturers had to widen the transoms to accommodate some of these larger horsepower motors.
This is one of the true joys of being able to host Indy Sports Show Live TV, where we're doing social media here, and we're doing Facebook and YouTube, and look at, you're over there capturing all the vintage and all the heritage. We were over near you last year, and I saw the interest of people that would come over and look and ask you questions. But I see a boat that's got an interesting story, a canoe, up on top of one of your displays. Real quick, in the short time we have left, what's that boat about? What's that canoe?
Well, somewhere around 1990, a fellow member of the club, his name was John Sudlow, and he actually owned Sudlow's Pier Shop up on Lake Wawasee. he had an interest in antique motors, and somewhere along the line, he had acquired that boat. The boat was built by a gentleman named Ed Morris, and he lived on Lake Maxinkuckee in Culver, Indiana, and he's credited with building more boats by hand than anyone that built boats, and he built over 1,000 boats by hand. Anyway, that's an Ed Morris rowboat, and it was put away in a barn before outboard motors. So I restored a motor for John Sedlow. In return, he gave me the boat, and it had been put away before outboard motors. So the boat's built in the 1880s.
Oh my.
Way back.
It's a very cool feature to your display. Do all of those motors run?
One of the things that my partner Rick and I like to do is make them run. One of the goals that I've always had is I want to hear the sound that each motor makes. And over the history of the outboard motor, nowadays all we know is Johnson, Evinrude, Mercury. But there's actually been 100 outboard motor manufacturers in the U.S. since the start with the Waterman in 1906. So it's fun to hear what they all sounded like. So we make them run.
As well you should. As I said, you never know what sights, sounds, smells, passions, interests you're going to find here at the 65th Annual Ford Boat Sport and Travel Show. That's what the Travel Cafe, that's what Indy Sports Show Live is all about. Can't thank you enough, the Antique Outboard Motor Club, Jay Walls, our guest. I'm your host of Indy Sports Show Live, Brian Pointer. We still have more to come. Get ready for a little RVing when we come back. Was that a bird?